Okay, so let's get started with our network design scenario number 1. You have been hired by a small company to set up a network in their new office, and they've given you a router, a firewall, a switch, and 3 different computers to set up, and your job is to design the network and to label the topologies that you use. So let's go ahead and let's get started with this. Okay, so I have my Glyphy software up and running. I'm going to go ahead and start pulling over the different hardware they're giving us. So here's our firewall. Go ahead and label that firewall. And they've given us a switch and a router. So here we go, we can use this as a switch. And let me scroll down to the routers. And here's a router we can use. And they've given us 3 computers. So let me scroll back up and we'll do a couple desktops and we'll do a laptop. And these we don't have to label. So I'm going to resize these a little smaller so they fit on the screen a little easier. Now let's figure out how are we going to design this. And this really gets back to our previous lecture where I introduced the 3 basic type of devices, where I introduced the router, the switch, and hubs, and firewalls. And I talked about your basic design. So they've given us a router, a firewall, switch, and 3 devices, and we need to hook them up. So let's get back to the basics. Remember that the router always goes on the edge of your network, and the router you use to connect to wide area networks and other networks. So the router is going to be on the edge of your network, and this is going to lead out to, and we'll just put this here, we'll put the cloud, and we'll call that the internet. So let's just call this the internet. So your router is going to connect to the internet, and then the first thing that you want to have on the inside of your network is your firewall, because you want to protect all the data that's coming in or going out. So you want to keep the bad stuff out, and you want to make sure that you don't let out information that you don't want to let out. And so we'll go ahead and just connect these together. So firewall connected to a router, router connected to the internet, and then we have our switch. And let me get rid of this and get back to my arrow. So the switch is going to come in here, and remember we need to connect our devices. So our devices are going to connect to the switch. And so I'll just do this for a quick design, and we'll connect each device to our switch. And then we'll connect our switch to our firewall. And there you go. There's our basic design. So we have our 3 computers on the inside connected to our central switch, which then connects to our firewall, and our firewall connects to the router, which connects us to the internet. So we have our design in place. Now we need to list the topologies. Well, let's think about the first topology. Is this a peer-to-peer or is this a client-server? Well, they didn't tell us, so we don't know. We don't know if any of these are server or not, but we're going to assume if they just said computers, it's probably a peer-to-peer design. So we'll just say peer-to-peer. We'll go make this a little bigger so it's easier for you to read. So we're using a peer-to-peer design, and now let's think about the actual topology. So let's go ahead and start marking this up, and let's go ahead and circle. I'm going to go ahead and circle this portion here. So off the top of your head, what type of topology is this? Well, we have a switch in the center, and we have these devices here. What is that? Well, this is going to be our star topology. And remember, the star topology always has a switch in the center. It's a central device, and everything connects on the outside. So star topology. And we'll go ahead and we'll bold this, and we'll make it a bit bigger so it's easier to read. We'll even make it bigger than the last one. So this is our star topology right here. There we go. And so if this is a star topology right here, well, what is this and what is this? Well, both of these are, you just have a single point to point here, and it's just a one-to-one link. So both of these must be a point to point, and that's exactly what they are. They are just single point to point. And so we'll just go ahead and put this in point to point. Again, we'll bold this and we'll make it a little larger. And we'll just do this. So we have 2 point-to-points. We have one here, one here. And we'll go ahead and bring this down over here as well, so it's easier to read. Now, one interesting thing here as well is that, well, what about this connection here? This is actually point-to-point as well. Even though it's part of the star topology here with the switch, it's also a point-to-point for data coming in and data coming out, because nothing can get to the router unless this is connected. So we have a point-to-point in 3 different spots. So we'll just bring this up here, and I'm going to use my nice little arrow tool. So we have a point-to-point here, we have a point-to-point here, and we have a point-to-point here. So it's not just having a point-to-point here and here. This is really a part of the point-to-point, even though it's part of the star topology. So that's going to go ahead and conclude our first simple scenario number 1. And if you remember, this is going to look just like our first design that we went through, and I explained what a router was and a firewall and a switch was in a previous lecture. And if I pull up my PowerPoint deck, let me show you what we should have. And let's jump to the next slide. And there you go. So this looks similar to what we just created. We have our 3 systems. We have our switch, we have a firewall, we have our network router, we have our star topology here, we have a point-to-point here, a point-to-point here, and a point-to-point here. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next video.